for joining us today. We're good. You're on, Sunny.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Sunny Bates. I am the CEO and founder of Black Logics, that is geared towards landscape architects. And I want to welcome everyone to our cohort, and I'm going to pass it on over to Stephen.
Awesome. Thanks, Sunny. Yeah, we got a great speaker today. We got Johanna coming on again. She's going to talk a little bit more about pitch decks and kind of continue on with her talk that she did a few weeks ago. But before we get started, just wanted to mention, if you are watching this live on YouTube or recorded, feel free to give us a like, leave a comment down below, share your thoughts, ask a question, continue that discussion, right? All the interactions we get with videos like this help push it out to more people. So if you found something really insightful, if you found something really cool from the video today, feel free to interact with it, because it might push it out to somebody else who might, find it equally as insightful, right? But I'll hand it over to Johanna.
Hello, and Curling said he's going to help me out today too. So we went through the slides, and he said he has some stories to share as well. So that's exciting. Thanks for having me back. We're gonna follow on to the presentation we did a couple weeks ago about the 7 key slides for your pitch deck. I have 7 more slides. They're not in any particular order. They're just samples of what type of content should go on those slides. And they're the slides that I kind of struggled with the most. So I felt like when I was looking for help, this is the stuff that I was really searching for. So I'll talk a little bit about that as we go through each slide. Let me share my screen so you can see the deck. Give me just a moment to do that. I have it all up and ready to go. Okay, let me put it in presentation mode. So hopefully you can see the go strategy slide.
Yes.
This is a slide that I really struggled with. I found tons of pitch deck templates that said like you should have a go-to market strategy. There weren't any good examples of what the content should be for this slide. And I thought it needed to be really complicated and researched and documented. And I thought it had to have marketing campaigns and all kinds of stuff. But really what you need to communicate is just that you have a plan, maybe has multiple phases, and it can be really straightforward. So this is a slide that I actually saw in deck and loved it so much that I adapted it for us. I think it's you can see that it goes from like San Diego to California to USA. And you can see that the complexity and the cost and resources needed for each of the phases increases as left to right. It's a pretty clear plan. Uh-oh, I just got a message that my internet connection is unstable. Are you having a hard time hearing me?
Yeah, it was going in and out, but it's fine, Joanna. I'll just add.
You talk and I'll switch to my hotspot.
Okay, no problem. I think the one thing I felt was really great about this is that phase 1. I think with our cohort, we've been saying we want every launch. And what does phase 1 launch looks like? Like we actually put a lot, it's like a city, right? And Stephen, maybe later on you could talk about a little bit about that. Remember your white paper about 0 to 1, like how you kind of can monopolize a city and then you keep going adjacent. Like Stephen's talk on that, he did a white paper on that, was like amazing on that. Like how do you do that phase 1, right? But I think the one thing for me, it was very hard for me to understand what phase 1 looked like for me. So I do like to have like a city that we are working on and we understand that city. The main example I learned was from Apple. We worked with Apple for our first few years with Fokcus. And the way they launched each city was unique. They actually said that when we launch a city, we learn about the city. So if we're talking about, we're going to launch in Santa Monica, we're going to learn about the startup Silicon Beach and environment, understand that. So when we launch, we know we're going to be part of the community like day 1. So that type of methodology or that thought process should be with what you guys think. If you're going to be launching in a city, understand that city, maybe even live in that city. We live in San Diego, so we started there. So that's the one thing that was really hard for a little Curl to understand how this go-to-market strategy really kind of works. But Apple helped me out a little bit about understanding what that phase 1 looks like.
And we're going to talk in a couple of minutes about your TAM slide, and we'll talk about what that means as well. And that should tie to your go-to-market strategy. What you're showing in your TAM slides, you should be able to relate the two things to each other. But before we do that, I have this Usually, should I rearrange them? Let's rearrange them. Let's do it live. Look at that. It makes more sense to have these two slides together, I think, at least in talking about what the content should be and how you find this information. So Colleen, you want to talk about TAM and SOM and sort of what those, I think those terms get thrown around a lot. I'm not sure everybody knows what they mean.
They totally do. At USC, everyone always talk about what's your total available market, or I'll give you a perfect example with low curling. There's a guy named Mark Stevens who's part of Sequoia Capital. Sequoia Capital has powered Facebook and Apple and all these great groups, right? Mark Stevens is like a USC alumni. I got to talk to him one time after he got this kind of award. And what he actually said, I said, like, what advice would you give a founder? Like, just 2 tips, right? And he told low curling, he said 2 things. Be really passionate at what you do, right? So, because you're going to have to tell the story over and over again. You have to have all these hurdles. Just be passionate about it. And I was like, okay, I got it. I think I understand. I heard that before. Right? The second thing he did kind of threw me off, but now I know as an older curling what that meant. He actually said, really good market, right? Have a big market where you can maybe even, if you want to, the market, understand the market, but really the market. I think Ty said that last week, like know your customer. So that's why TAM is so important. It's more than just the dollar number of it. It's actually just knowing what that market is, right? And so that's part of what TAM is. I want to just break it down kind of in that way, that the market is pretty much like your customers, and understand what they actually need, and what the other players look like. I think that's very important. The other part of this slide that's really crucial is that target market at the very bottom, that small little circle, that city, that has actually been crucial for me. Actually knowing that you're not going to be tackling all US, all North America, you're just going to tackle your local city and understand what needs are, because LA is much different than New York on their needs, even if it's just fashion, right? Think of the seasons in New York. So understanding that is actually even more crucial, but having the big picture helps out investors understand that you at least know in general what your customers are, right? And then you're drilling down to these cities, these personas, things of that nature. Hopefully that's helpful, Johanna.
Yes. And as you build this slide, you may find that in the very early stages of your startup that you are, did I stop sharing? Sorry about that.
No, it's still sharing, but maybe do presentation mode. You can do presentation.
I can't do that. I was going to pull up that article from Steve Blank, but so I can't do that and be in presentation mode at the same time. But so sorry about that, but I'll put it back in just a moment. But you may find, especially in the earlier stages, you're not exactly sure what your market is, and you may tinker with this quite a lot. You may initially think like you're in education services, and then later you might realize you're in professional services, or you might think that you're direct to consumer, and later you realize you're B2B. So there are a lot of things, especially as you're doing your customer discovery, your interviews, and trying to figure this out. Like this slide could change quite a bit. Also, sometimes it's really hard to find this information, but if you're just persistent, you can figure it out. And sometimes you have to figure it out by adding together different pieces of information, but just Google is your friend, and just keep searching and being persistent and asking people. And eventually you'll find articles and things. But bigger companies, they actually just pay for reports that give them all the information about their competitors and what their market is. So we have to be a little more resourceful, a little scrappier, and a little more creative in trying to get the answers. Sometimes you can get them just by talking to somebody you know that works for a big company in your industry, though. They might just share the information with you.
One other piece is if you're like at Cal State San Marcos, they have a research library and they have a research assistant that's helped out startups. So if you're connected to a university, that's another way to get connected on that part.
That's true. Yeah, they may have.
You might have like access to pitch or something like that.
Yes, exactly. So do you want to jump to the petal diagram now, since we're kind of talking about how you figure out your market? Does that make more sense to
that's
do
a
that
great
one next?
Yeah, I like the interactivity, John.
Sorry
Love
about
being
that.
flexible.
We
Yeah,
went
that's
through
good.
this yesterday, and I'm just realizing as we're talking about it that it makes more sense to kind of do these together. And I wanted to, the reason why I pulled up my browser was so I could show you what a petal. So here's a blank petal diagram, but this is another way that you can talk about your market. If you have, like, you're creating a market, or it's a new market, or it actually touches a lot of market segments. And maybe you've seen this before, but when I found this, it really, really helped. So you could kind of see, let me pull one up.
Yeah, that one in the
Loading.
Slack one was interesting too. Yeah, those are great.
Oh, here's Slack. That's a good one. So let's pull that one up.
Yeah.
So you can see that.
See,
Just
but
want to see
one,
that picture.
yeah. The one
There you
interesting
go.
thing about this is we've learned this from we used to do this at Apple when we did our city highlights, and it really helped me out too, Joanna. Just that the fact that we've actually found these examples, but you can explain it.
Can you see the diagram?
Yeah, it looks good.
Is my screen sharing? Okay, good. So really what you do is you say, like, my business, my market is at the intersection of task management and real-time collaboration and, chatting solutions and storage solutions and I'm not sure what this category is, but unified something. But you put, like, who your competitors are to in each of the categories to try to make sense of this. And then you can go through and figure out what's the market size of this, what's the market size of this, what's the market size of this. And then that's your total available market. And you just put your business in the middle. So
Exactly.
while you're figuring it out, go ahead.
And I think there is one that has some dollar amounts next to each one. We'll put that under the YouTube channel.
There are some.
There's some really good ones too.
And this process actually came from Steve Blank, from a blog post that he wrote, and he's the author of Lean Startup up in the Bay Area. He's pretty influential in sort of thinking about the new way that we do startups, which is, with customer discovery and very little investment and prototyping and just kind of a new way of thinking about it that comes out of the lean manufacturing culture. And we did another talk where we talked about Kanban, which is another lean concept. So I just wanted to sort of tie those concepts together for you, that this is another thing that kind of comes out of thinking about doing things, efficiently and at a very, small scale and then building on top of that.
No, that's great. Thanks for bringing this up. I totally forgot about a good example.
Yeah, I did too. So, and thanks for your patience while I was pulling it up. But it's called a petal diagram if you want to Google it before we get it posted. Now let's talk about competitors. So that's a nice lead in, because you saw on this slide that there's a place to put your competitors in each of the petals. And then I don't know if you noticed, but there were some companies that were, like, at the intersection of this one and this one. But just pick your, like, two main competitors. And at the beginning, your competitors might be the giant companies that you know about that do kind of what you do. And then later you may be figuring out, as you talk to your customers, oh, they're using spreadsheets for this, or oh, they're using some little niche off the shelf, inexpensive thing or free solution for solving the problem. But you want to try to get as close as you can to what what most of your customers are actually using. And you don't want to have this be an eye chart, like an exhaustive list. The formatting of this is not my favorite. It's not the most beautiful slide. So, you don't necessarily have to conform to the format of it, but the simplicity of it, you can even put pictures in here. Like, these are the platforms that you're competing on. It doesn't have to be check marks or words. So you can do it either way, but 5 or 6 things that are the main things about your system, not every single thing that your system has. Everybody understands that your system does more than 5 or 6 things, or your solution. Any more comments about the competitor analysis, Kron?
Yeah, the simplicity of it. I've been learning from you too, with different groups you've kind of interacted with, that icons are really good internationally, right?
Oh, yeah.
So I love the fact that you have been teaching me that. You're really good at this kind of branding and international
And
But
we
the
can
one,
we can share that tip if you want,
yeah,
and
that might be a
that
really,
other resource. So if your product is local and you intend to stay that way, you don't have to think about this as much. But if you have a global product, you're going to have to think about other languages and translations. And so one of the ways that I've seen industries handle that is through the use of standard icons. So there are some sites. What's the Google site that we've been using?
I think it's like Google Material, right?
Yeah, Google
Material
Material
design.
Icons, I think it's called.
Yeah.
Has some standard icons. That International Standard Organization, ISO, has standard icons, and that means something across all languages and countries. That they sort of, ISO is in particular an international group that decides on what the standards are. And so if you conform to the ISO standards, then you you have a pretty compelling case to not do translation. So you can use things like the symbol that means fragile instead of the word fragile that you might, and some expense later if you think about your communicating things about your products in terms of icons rather than in terms of words.
And the only thing else, John, is that this is the one of these slides, Billboard slide 2, but this is the one slide that you can have it kind of consumer facing. And meaning that I've seen this slide being done to say, like, you know what, Netflix has this, Hulu has this, but
sure.
we at Roku has this. This is one of the slides that you can probably, if really will, be used for consumer facing to help people make that kind of buying decision. So that's the only thing I would add, Johanna.
Yeah, I agree with that totally. You can put it on your website if it's beautiful.
If it's beautiful.
So the next slide, the next two slides are really about financials or financial related things. You don't have to show every year since inception, just show like 3 years or 4 years if you have some, some really interesting stuff that spans that period. But you don't have to clutter up the slide, and you can just talk about, what your expenses were, what your revenue was, and what your profit was. And you can see in the first year, expense up and profit negative and no revenue at all. And in the second year, you see a tiny bit of revenue, but still like negative profit, which is loss. And in the third year, you can see that there is now quite a bit of revenue, and the revenue exceeds the expenses, which means there's some profit. It's a pretty simplified view, but it's really easy to look at this and grasp what it means right away. And I would encourage you to get even the tiniest sliver of revenue as early as you can. Curling used to challenge us in the very early days. Like, what could we put on our website that somebody would pay $1 for? Like, is there anything that we could put out there that we could get people to pay $1 for? And that was a really good way of thinking about things. Like, as we started thinking about products and services that we could offer, we really thought about, would somebody pay $1 for this? And if you can get 100 people to pay $1, you have $100, and that's more than zero. So, showing any kind of movement in that direction is really positive. That's the beginning of traction. That's the beginning of trying to understand what your customers are willing to pay for. And it's a good thing to do as early as possible in the process.
Yeah, I remember thinking about, Trevor, Johanna always speaks to our cohorts about, Trevor's one of our VCs that we kind of interact with. He'll be speaking at tech school soon, but he always says, Curling, I always go directly to the team slide and financial slide.
Exactly.
Those are the two slides he goes to. And he said, sometimes just the financial, right? It tells me so much about the story of the company. And so if you're actually maybe presenting something and you have the financial one, tell the story. In fact, I just listened to a group from UCSD, they named Carrie. They do these sensors, implant sensors for people with maybe addiction, right? And he actually kind of told the story in this way where, yes, it was high expenses because he had to do a lot of R&D. They had to do all these things that it was getting ramping FDA, right? And so that's why it had expenses. The second part of it was that at least had some pilots after that. That's the middle section. That was 2019. And from those pilots, at least he got some right? And then the last part is that he's in this third kind of iteration where he has bigger pilots, and they even did a pivot so they actually can use their quote unquote tool for other things, right? Or for other markets. So if you are actually presenting this, you can actually tell a story about each year to give it some context. And I think that's really that's powerful. I think we've always been talking about storytelling, but one, this gives you a quick story by showing it. And two, you can add the elements to it. So that storytelling skill works really well. It could explain why this graph looks the way it does, but it also explains that you have a grasp of what's going on. And then there's a good trajectory there. So that's the only thing I would add, Joanna.
But it's good to, I mean, it's good to be clear. Like, even if there's not a good trajectory, talk about, like, here's where we are and here's how we plan to make it a good trajectory.
Good point.
Okay, so this is the ask slide, and Curling and I had quite an extensive conversation about this last night, and we think that there's actually a whole talk in this particular topic.
There is. I think the one thing, Joanna, I've been finding out is that we were helping it.
And then we'll go ahead. No, I was just saying, then we're gonna probably have a whole other talk just focused on that. That's
Yeah, I think we could.
Unstable again.
Yeah, no problem. I was just saying is that I'll go back to Trevor. Trevor used to say, if you ask for advice, you'll get. If you ask for money, you usually get some advice, right? So there's two aspects of this, right? You're probably gonna get a lot of advice from this one, good job, but the one thing we've been learning more and more is actually just telling the story. So there's some stories here that's built out. One of the stories I've been finding out when you have a slide that is people drill down to this use of funds. You'll see it all color coded. John has really color on there. It's actually for a really interesting play because it tells a little bit more about your story. Like, yes, I'm going to be focusing on development at this time. That's why it's one of the highest ones. Yes, we're going to be focused on legal because we have a patent pending product, right? And two, our website, we're updating it. We're getting more awareness. We have videos that we're actually doing, and that is going to help us with marketing. And we need someone directly helping us with marketing. So this actually uses as a storytelling thing. So when people are looking at the at least they know you have a plan with that one. So this use of fund, I've been seeing people do it really well. The other aspects I think of is maybe just the founder story, that you have other people helping you. So you can tell, like, yes, me and my three friends, we all started off by saying 30-30, but we adjusted it. Now our other ones, that's 15. So you can use it as a story, because I know when people drill down into it, yes, there's some numbers there, but there's a story behind it. Those are initial things. But yes, me and Joanna said we can probably do another part just on this. But this has at least helped people understand some elements of how do you ask for funds. And most of the time we do have people ask for maybe more advice. Like, yes, I need someone on my board. Yes, I need another senior Java developer. Like, that would be amazing. That's way more worth than any money I can have. I'd like something like that. So we usually have people ask for those types of things too.
So it's totally not required to ask for money in your pitch. Not required. You don't have to have this slide at all. You don't have to ask for anything. You can just be sharing information and getting feedback. You can explicitly ask for feedback. You can do it verbally or do it as a slide. I love Curling's point about your ask doesn't have to be money. And sometimes it's actually better if your ask is not money, especially if you're in a very early stage and don't have traction. And I was just really thinking about sort of my own, previous startups, and what my experience was thinking about how do you fund them. And, my first sort of more significant startup, I had a few like rough start failure ones before I had one that had some traction. But the first one that had some traction, I bootstrapped, and I did get to a point where I needed some funding, and I really didn't understand about funding. And I just needed a small amount. I needed like $5,000 or $10,000 to buy some equipment that I just couldn't figure out how I was going to fund that through my revenue. So asking for a really small amount of money is totally a fine thing to do. You don't have to ask for $500,000 or $1 million. And I guess on the other end of the spectrum, Be realistic about what you're asking for and have a real plan. If you just have an idea, I don't know too many people that have millions of dollars burning a hole in their pocket and they're just looking for ideas, right? So if you just only have an idea and you're looking for funding, it's a pretty hard sell. There are a lot of people who have a lot of ideas that would like $1 million to fund their idea. So it's much better if you have something real and concrete and you have a plan for how you're going to make progress, even if you don't have funding. Also, you want to be careful about making sure that the funding is not all focused on paying the founders, that the money is actually going to build the product and going to build the company. And maybe it's for some key hires, but it isn't like, I need $1 million so I can pay me and my best friend, $500,000 a year. It's not going to be well received, even though it might be really cool to have it.
Tripty had a great question. Tripty, you want to unmute yourself and ask that question?
I do. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is you could do an entire,
yes,
like 6 weeks on this just topic,
yes.
right? There's so much stuff to go through here, but there were a few really great things that I hadn't heard before. So curling, I had never heard of like an ask being for an advisor or a person. Like I've never ever heard of that. And I understand that my background's in finance, but that's a really interesting, very different thing. However, there's 2 questions here that I have. So one is, when you're a founder, you have a lot of experience in building a product and you have a lot of experience on the technical side. You don't necessarily have any idea about this page, right? So there are a lot of numbers on here. And the initial question I had was, and if you've never, raised money, how do you even determine what your pre-money valuation is? And if that's too technical, that's for a different time, we can talk about it. But like, how do you know, like, where did you come up with $2.5 million?
Yeah.
So one of the cool things about this slide is there's actually a spreadsheet behind it that will let you plug in some numbers and try to figure it out. But the answer is like, you're going to have to learn some stuff about numbers that I think Ty mentioned it last week. Like, I'm not good at math. And I know way more stuff about math and finance stuff than I ever thought I would, right? Like you are going to have to learn some of it.
Yeah, I like
Sorry, go ahead, Carly.
No, Johanna, you can talk more about that spreadsheet though.
I don't totally remember what's in it, but I do think we should have a separate, like Tripty said, you could spend 6 weeks on this. I do think we should talk about, in another talk about debt financing versus credit finance, credit.
So then as it pertains to the pitch though, like, that we're talking about this, we're talking about the pitch. The other thing outside of asking for a person or advisement or, stuff that Curly had mentioned was, hey, if you just need something small, right? If you just need something small, you just need enough for inventory or for an outsourced team or whatever that 5 or 10,000 can get you.
Mm-hmm.
How do you sway people like away from this? I feel like every founder has heard this over and over and over again of, oh, well, that's family and friends. And no, everyone doesn't have family and friends that just can give them $5,000, and everyone doesn't have family and friends who are accredited investors or who are angels who know what to do with, $5,000, 5 or 10,000. The first thing I feel like everyone's going to say, hey, if it's that small amount of money, raise from family and friends, or do an iFund Women, or do a Kickstarter, or do an Indiegogo. And if you're like, hey, I know this can work, I really just want $5,000 or $10,000. How do you tailor this pitch to that, number one? And is it also that the audience is someone different than that you would go to versus a big investor?
I think you make a really good point about, not everybody's friends and families have a lot of disposable income that they can pour into your dream, or they might not be comfortable doing it even if they do have the money, right? Just because they're more risk averse maybe than people who engage in investment activities. One of the ways in the case that I was talking about where I just needed to buy some equipment was I talked to my community. Like even though I didn't have a lot of revenue, I had a huge influence in my particular space. I got a ton of free press. There were, every day there were publications that were talking about my products. And so I leveraged that to sort of have a way to have a conversation with my community, and people introduced me to people who introduced me to people. And eventually I found somebody who was really passionate about what I was doing and also had, an extra $10,000 that, she might be willing to put into my company to help me pay for equipment. And she was willing to give it to me as a loan versus, a portion of my company, which was really cool. So there are other ways to sort of reach that market other than doing a Kickstarter. Kickstarter didn't even exist then. So I think some of my thinking about solving that problem comes from the pre-Kickstarter era. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I think like maybe if that's maybe another session also is what are the things we need to have in place prior to this deck, which one of the things might be community then, that
exactly.
Got it.
Exactly.
Thank you.
So and I think my company was already about 2 years old at that point. So it was not super early stages. I absolutely just used I still worked full time, and I used my, annual bonus to buy my first, stuff to make things, all my raw materials and everything. So there was certainly quite a bit of personal money that went into it to get started.
Johanna, there's one more other question for Brianna. It kind of ties to what you just said. It says like, how did you calculate this from Brianna? How did you calculate how much to pay yourself and others?
Oh yeah.
You have some interesting language.
So here, I don't know that we're showing that anybody's getting paid here. We're just showing shares. But I think that it is totally specific to your case, right? Like when in my particular company, I didn't take a salary. I put all the money back into the company. And then if I had money available to grow the activities that we were doing, I used it to hire people. So even I think 4 years in, I was paying other people and not myself. Now, looking back, I probably shouldn't have I learned a lot of painful lessons in that company too. I probably shouldn't have put as much money back into the company, into the product and into the inventory as I did. And I hope that I'm a little wiser now, but and maybe some of that money could have been profit or could have been, in my pocket. But I really was passionate about what we were doing, and I just wanted to grow it and get it in the hands of as many people as possible. And I wasn't necessarily thinking about how do I maximize profit.
That's
sort of answer your question. Yeah.
That was from the cohort from Brianna.
Yeah, but there are tons of different formulas to figure out once you do have some revenue to figure out. And a good starting point is to figure out what is the market rate for somebody who's doing the job that you or someone else is doing. Like look on Glassdoor or other sites that share that kind of information, find out what the market rate is, and then figure out what the value of the options are. And then whatever isn't covered by the options should be covered by money, right? To make the person's risk sort of a fair compensation for what the work that they're doing.
No, that was good. And Brianna says, thank you.
Okay, good. Okay. And any more comments on this one? I know we did spend quite a bit of time.
Yeah, I know this is a hot topic. No, I think that's good. We can go to the next one.
Yeah. And it's a hard thing to figure out. There's a ton of stuff on this slide, and each one is like something that you have to learn about and figure out, right? So the next slide is the user journey slide, and we just have one more slide after this. We're getting close to wrapping up. We love this. We did a project with a company called General Assembly where they came to our sessions and they observed what we were doing, and then they created this map for us about what the experience was with our users. And it was a really cool project. And so this was one of the outcomes. And another outcome was they gave us a lot of feedback about which parts of our business were not working and which parts were frustrating our users at different stages of their journey. But being able to clearly say, this is how people, go through our system and this is what their experience should be, it in a picture is a really nice thing to be able to do.
Yeah. You want to comment on the doodlers?
Yeah, so I love these little guys. I think they're so cute, but I sort of have I have kind of an artsy background, so I have a bias towards cute little cartoony things. Plus, I think I had a My Little Pony thing going on for a little while, so anything that's cute and adorable, I'm on board. But anyway, we did get some feedback from like some of the veterans that we're helping who said like maybe not for government sales and things like that. And I think we've talked about that before, that you do want to be really mindful of who your audience is in terms of how you put your branding together. You want to make sure that that you have sort of situational awareness of who your customer is and whether this type of a picture would resonate with them. But these little guys are free and they're pretty cute.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is I've been talking to a lot of people about even just the current cohort. If you have a developer and you're trying to in so much convey what you want to do for the developer, this actually helps the developer. It actually helps them kind of guide them through like what the experience has. And I think I did get talk with one of the people from the cohorts about like, yeah, this is actually a great way to convey something even just to your team. Like, hey, this is what you want to do. This is my goal, right? So I always feel like this is another one that's really helpful. Not only investor facing or consumer facing, but just your team internally. This is a really great way to kind of convey what you need to do and what your look like.
I agree in terms of just communicating the context and the bigger picture of what you're trying to accomplish. It sort of can help your team make decisions along the way. I've managed a lot of hardware and software development projects. And what I find along the way is that the people that are actually doing the engineering work often have like these crazy questions that I never would thought of, like how many seconds should that stay on the screen and what size font should that be? And I mean, they're like these super detailed questions that they need to make decisions about in order to implement it in the system. And sometimes just sort of showing them the direction that we need to go and what the goal is lets them have a measure of independence in making those decisions. And rather than peppering you with a ton of really detailed questions, they can just mock something up and bring it to you and say, is this what you meant?
That's great. We had a quick question from Tripty. Like, I know we put this pitch deck and we on our Slack channel, we'll put like a link to it, but this slide itself, is it, you built it too, right, Johanna, from things and then you made it, This is actually a screenshot of the work that that General Assembly team did. I haven't actually built this, but it would not be too hard to do it. Just in case someone wanted to do something, like if Tripty's team wanted to do something like that.
Yeah, and I'll give you a little secret that if you want to just use the images and change the text, you could paste this into like PowerPoint or Google Slides, and you could just put white boxes over top of like over the text, and you can change it to your own text. And I'm cool with that. Like, feel free to take it and use it. The little doodler characters they're not copyrighted. They're in the public domain, so you can totally use them. And you have our permission if you like this slide, and you can map your journey to the same one. Feel free to use it.
Exactly. I think we put it on Slack. We have it there, but we can actually have a link to this deck under the video too.
Yes, for sure.
All right. I mean, Johanna, I know you always.
We got one more.
No, that's good. That's good.
Do you want to talk any more about this?
No. Yeah, just do the secret sauce. That's great.
Okay. And I guess I do want to sort of talk about, we've brainstormed a little bit about would it be useful to have a session about the tools that you use to build something, like what would the effort look like to build this? What type of tools would you use? Where would you get the assets? And it's just some like quick tips about how to do some graphic design type work. And if that's useful to everyone, we can put a talk together, like a more hands-on, like we did with the project building. We can do that.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Johanna. That's a good.
I've learned a ton of stuff in sort of piecing all these things together. I'm happy to share, what took lots and lots of hours to sort of figure out. I see the dialogue blinking again. Do we have more questions before we move on?
No, that's good. I think that was you answered it.
Okay, perfect. So this is the last slide. This is the secret sauce slide. And sometimes investors in particular want to know, like, what is the really special thing about your company that makes you different than anybody else who's trying to solve this problem? And often they also want to know, like, is it patented and is it protected? And is there a way that you can keep other people from doing it? And so being able to talk about what your technology is and how you protect it is another thing. You don't have to tell what your secret sauce is. Like here on this slide, we don't talk about, what tools we use for assessment. We don't talk about what's in our algorithm for the matching. We just sort of talk about, like, there's we collect some information, we do some fancy technology stuff, and the outcome is mentoring, right? So you can super simplify your secret sauce slide, but it's another good one to have, even if you just have it sort of in your backup slides. At the end of a deck, I always actually, let me see if I have it in this slide. No, I don't. I took it out. But usually at the end of a slide deck, I have like a transition slide that says backup slides on it. And I have a bunch of slides after that are the things that other people may have asked for, but don't necessarily fit into my presentation. So if certain questions come up, I have sort of this little arsenal of other slides that I can pull up quickly so that people have something to look at while I'm answering questions about any particular thing they're interested in digging deeper on.
That's great. And I like how you use the icons. You went with that international type of look.
Yes, for sure.
Okay,
well, I think so that's it. That's it for the slides.
No, that's great, Joanna. We have about a few minutes for Q&A, but we kind of peppered in some of the Q&A throughout your talk. I think that worked out good. I actually like that.
Bonus slide. There is one in there.
Is there a bonus slide?
See? But it's just that this is my transition. I call them bonus slides. And then, like, I have these other ones in here. But anyway.
And those bonus slides have helped us out. We should with the group. Sometimes people ask us questions.
Oh, yes.
And then we like, oh, you know what? We have a slide for that, exactly. Right? And so always be prepared with what some of the questions that asked and things that nature. And then always, having a picture or a slide that shows that one, you're ready, right? And two, that you really know what you're doing. So it's this credibility part. So we always have bonus slides, even though we might just present the first 10.
Exactly. And so that secret sauce slide I usually have in the backup slides. Same thing with the user journey slide, unless I'm talking to someone that I know has a deep interest in that. Even the competitor analysis slide, sometimes I put that in the backup slides. It's the slides that we covered in the other talk that are sort of the really key ones that I would always have in the main presentation.
That's great. But if anyone else have any other Q&A, you guys can actually just post your questions in chat. Stephen, I know you always have that one last question that you always ask the presenter. You want to ask that, Stephen?
Well, I do, but we've had Johanna on here before, and she's answered it before.
I always answer the question.
So, is there any other questions that you have curling from your cohort?
I think the main thing for me is actually, I get this all the time. Should I have 2 decks? Should I have 3 decks, 4 decks like that? John, what do you think about that? That was one I got recently.
So I think you could have 1 deck and you reshuffle it depending on who your audience is. So you just build all the slides, keep them in 1 deck, and have that transition slide like the one I'm showing right now. This is bonus slides, and you put them at the end. And those are the slides that are for the other audience. And if you're giving somebody the slides versus presenting the slides, then obviously I would delete out any ones that you think are not applicable to that audience. But absolutely, you can just keep 1 deck and keep reshuffling it and refining it for whoever you're presenting to.
That's great. And it actually is good to do you agree, like, just to personalize it depending on who you're going to
I think it's good to personalize it, but the more you talk to your customers and the closer you get to them, the more you're going to be able to have messaging that actually speaks to all of them. So, the closer you get to the customers, the less personalization I would say that you have to do, because you're going to be so targeted in the problems that you're solving.
Great. Well, John, this is a great job. I love the part 2 of this, and thanks for telling your story about that. I think that's what makes it, that's definitely that journey you had there was great for this deck, and even for the cohort and other groups. I know we might even have this other part, right? I know we could
I think
probably
we
delve
should.
into some of these other slides,
I
right?
think so.
Okay, that's great. Well, what we'll do is, Stephen, do you want to kind of wrap it up to speed networking?
Yeah, we can do that. So just a heads up for anyone who'd like to stick around for the, our 5-10 minute speed networking, we'll match everyone up at the end. So if you don't want to be a part of that, then you feel free to drop off. But I guess just to wrap everything up, thanks, Johanna, for speaking today. Thanks for giving us even more tips on pitch decks. And it sounded like there were some hot topics today, so that was great. We might have some future sessions in the works. But yeah, just to echo from the beginning of the talk, if you're watching this on YouTube, whether it's live or whether it's recorded, feel free to give us a like, leave a comment down below, whether you're sharing your thoughts, asking a question, maybe discussing with somebody else who's in the comments, whatever that may be. All the interactions we get with videos like this help push it out to more people. So if you found something insightful, give us a like, left a comment, you can help that video be pushed out to somebody else who might find it equally as insightful, right? Or entrepreneur really needed to hear something about their pitch deck today. So it's an easy way to give back. But as always, we will see you in the next Tech School episode.